I thought it'll be great to get, knowing that you were coming to Australia, and I follow a lot of your work, Scott, on your podcast, and been working a lot with Tim. So I thought it'd be a great conversation that everyone could have. And also, there's a lot of knowledge on PEDs, harm reduction around PEDs, people with expert knowledge in both research and practical. So, how do we start the conversation? I think the common thing we've been discussing a lot is the social and cultural impacts, the impacts from an economic perspective, harm reduction. So I guess let's start with the harm reduction side and the landscape of some of your recent work in the whole direction of drug coaches now becoming a thing. Might be interesting to hear from your side with drug coaches now becoming quite a. Do you see it as there's a problem here, or can there be something good that comes from?
I think, we talked the other day, in the car about the idea of it not just being the one thing. And I think that can be the problem if we just focus on just the drugs, then we're not looking at everything else that's creating that package. In fact, I got a comment on a post that I made. It was a clip of a really good bodybuilder named Cooke, and he said that the number one thing that people are lacking is the ability to train intensely. And somebody commented, and they're like, well, this is a foolish statement, that you should also, you're not recognizing the value of the drugs and what the drugs do. It's like, well, the drugs are there, but I mean, when Kuba made his statement, he was assuming, yeah, you got those things covered, and you've also got your food covered, right? But all those things, they're all kind of part of the bigger picture. So if we just isolate it down to like, hey, I'm going to give you the best cycle, the optimal cycle for you. It's an important word, optimal, right? That I'm going to give you the optimal cycle. We're not looking at all the other factors that go into success.
Well, yeah, then, like we were saying, you end up isolating. When you fixate on it, or as a marketing ploy,
Yeah.
almost like, oh, what's the best cycle? You see a lot of people sitting behind, or a lot of coaches even sitting behind the scenes and not seeing, say, progress happen. I've seen this a lot where someone's not making progress, and the easiest sometimes approach for them to take is like, well, let's increase. They just look at their previous cycle. What are you doing now? Okay, well, let's just change the cycle, rather than not intervening into like we were saying before, the nutrition, the sleep, basic technique. So first thing, like breathing as well, how can it have impact on the nervous system and health?
I think that, when we take a step outside of sport, we can even actually use sport as an example, but if we look at how something like, let's say, type 2 diabetes is managed in clinical world, typically speaking, I think there's a movement, now it hasn't always been the case, but there's a movement that looks at addressing lifestyle factors before employing certain pharmaceutical agents to help try to counteract some of the underlying blood glucose dysfunction that's happening. So, hey, are you getting enough physical activity? Are you eating a certain way before then just going straight into the drugs? Now, this wasn't always the case, but there's been a gradual movement. If we think of that and that kind of perspective or model, I think it's really useful to go like, drugs aren't always the first place that we need to be looking, even if we want to get to a certain end point. And that end point for an individual might actually be more risky if you start off with drugs first. Even with, let's say, statin use, that there are statins very well known to have clinical implications of their use. And that then you just kind of get this whole crazy polypharmacy thing going to try to manage the effects from one drug. So you add another, and it just, you're constantly playing this game. I think one of the things that the kind of world of PED use can hopefully someday soon get on top of is really considering, like, do you have the, and I say this with complete honesty and transparency, but do you have the fundamentals in place to make you a good human?
Mhm.
Like, are you doing those pillars of good health that have been like so well established within the literature as it relates to not only health in the acute sense, but long-term health? So exercise, nutrition, positive social relationships. And the answer is often no, they're not. And that can not only make use less risky, but it also, like, speaking to the meathead, can make it better.
Mm.
Better outcomes, much better outcomes.
I think a lot of this might be coming like people's influence, the social cultural influences from um, people's peers. I know you do a fair bit of work on this. I guess your opinion as well. Why is it become a fixation to just take anabolics rather than seeing good quality coaching?
I mean, yeah, so I'm doing a study on drug coaching at the moment, and generally, there's some people that offer it as a single tool. Some people offer the package, nutrition, training, and the PEDs, and oftentimes that looks like preliminary data tells us that looks like it's providing optimum outcomes. It's providing the best outcomes, and the people that do that are often not financially motivated. Well, there is, everybody's got to eat, but in terms of the motivation, they care about the end user, about the pillar that is, harm reduction, and about the person's health. And if they've got an investment there, then they're leveraging their lived experience usually, which is based on those three things. But everybody, I guess not everybody, but now there's this interest in, well, I can just take product X, or I can take more of product X, or big gyms taking this, so I'm just going to do what he does. Now that's not like a new rhetoric. That's been going on for 30, 40 years, 50, yeah, like at least 50 years, right? So what's changed? I think that social media, speedier proliferation of messaging. We've got really strong group norms in young men and women. And social identity theories will tell us that people will be drawn to those prototypes, right? And then the difference between the in-group and the out-group will grow. So we are the meatheads, and we do this, and that's it. And what used to be, just an enjoyable activity suddenly becomes not the pillars of what's a good human. It becomes, it's just the drugs. Forget about good relationships. Nutrition goes out the window. Nobody's training as hard as perhaps, or they've got the perception that they are, but they're not, because they're fatigued, or whatever else, and the perspective just gets lost.
Yeah.
And I think like that, as a female-based researcher, you see that so much more now than I did even when I started my research in this world, like a decade plus ago. And that women and androgen use in particular was such a taboo topic. And that there were very few compounds that were seen to be acceptable for a female to take. And very few kind of niche populations that drug use was seen to be acceptable. You wouldn't see that, the everyday, just fit individual going to the gym even think that was in their realm or acceptable to do. And now we're there, and they are. And I see that, and I've talked to my husband about this, that it seems like there's this weird shift, at least within the US and in the UK, where you have this harm risk prevention kind of world around male users, and that has created this new kind of dialogue or rhetoric around like, okay, what is risk? Maybe we shouldn't be taking 6 grams. Maybe we should only be taking 2 grams or whatever it might be. So it's kind of began to put more of a safety switch on male use. And in my world, with the different individuals I work with, consult with, research, it's the opposite for women all of a sudden, that we went from only a few compounds being acceptable or okay, or only a few very niche subculture groups being acceptable or okay, to the complete opposite. And you're getting individuals utilizing multiple compounds for extended durations of time, and there's not that consciousness that exists anymore. Because whoever says steroids are bad or silly and stupid and that's outdated, and we know better than that. And it's just like, okay, wait a second, this happened fast. This transition happened very, very fast, and I can hypothesize some of the factors for that, but it's terrifying because we have such little information on male users, let alone female users. And so the knowledge base is so far below our user base now. And that gap is growing. I mean, every day it's growing.
What's driving that, do you think?
Social media, I think, is a huge driving force. I think social perceptions. I also think female muscularity and acceptance of female muscularity. I mean, I come from the age of pre-DLB where women didn't train in the gym hard unless you were training for a bodybuilding competition. And back then, there was either bodybuilding, figure, or fitness. And if you couldn't dance and didn't have any gymnastics background, you didn't do fitness. So now that leaves figure and female bodybuilding. And that was it. So you have this proliferation of categories in competitive bodybuilding, which is also fed into our fitness industry. At the same time, you have like the
Micro celebrity.
Yeah, I was gonna say but also like the posterior centric world that we're all in now, where we went from having, it seemed to be socially acceptable for women to have more large breasts, now derrieres. I mean, some of that was plastic, but then a lot of it now has been translated into muscularity, especially lower body density is considered to be sexy and cool for women to do. And women will pursue that just like they would have breast augmentations without any regard for the challenges that might arise getting there, or once you're there after you have it. And now you're having social media to drive you forward to do that.
So what do we, I guess, do as coaches, right? Well, coach, researcher, consultant, when you're getting these external influences and you have an individual who's just meathead, who wants to push, drive, and is where, I guess, is where some of my discoveries when I started consulting quite a few other people in other areas, just to explore what people do and then experiment, usually with myself first. And I guess, where do we draw our own ethical values in how we service individuals when their sole goal is that they come to you for performance, which will they come to me for performance? How do we draw this line where what is going to be my role here with ethical value but still provide a service because it's been commercialized?
Yeah.
I've heard a few different, I don't know if you guys have, but I've heard a few different ways people are slicing this up. And it's interesting, some people have like a disclaimer in a conversation and those sorts of things once people move past a certain compound or select particular types of compounds, right? And it'll be, you're now moving into performance territory where health markers are going to be skewed. This is not good for your brain. This is not good for your heart. This is not good for your kidneys. I can't advocate for you doing this. But if you want to do this, be aware of these risks. Here's a 1-pager or something like that, or just a verbal conversation. And client, consumer acknowledges, and then they move on. Because people, what are we doing when we're doing harm reduction or practicing harm reduction? People are making well-informed choices that and they're understanding what's going on, or the most comprehensive understanding of what's going on, they're probably going to make the same decision anyway. Maybe not, but at least they're aware of what's going on, and what actual control do we have. If we look at, locus of control and self-determination theories and things like that, it's, is are we going to halt their intrinsic determination? No, but we can at least keep some health markers in check, and perhaps encourage other them considering other things like training a bit harder, or eating differently, or
And that's where I try to focus, I think, is, and I'll tell you what, where I think the people that I work with are after that step. So you're talking about the step where you're like, okay, you're going into this territory where things are going to get skewed. I'm at the point they come to me and it's like, we're already in that territory. And sometimes they're in a more extreme place with it. But if we can get more out of the other areas, if we can get more out of nutrition, say, for instance, and that they get, they see that their performance is improving, they see that they're losing fat, they see that their composition is improving, and they're saying, and I'm not even taking half of what I used to take. It's like, then they start to, that light bulb turns on, and I think they become a little bit more open-minded. But it's not everybody's going to be in that place. I know, and I didn't always see myself as somebody who was a modest or moderate person as far as performance enhancement goes, but I guess I am. And looking back, I realized there are people who haven't wanted to work with me because they were like, yeah, he's not going to push as hard as I want, and they'll find the person that they're looking for. You're right. Like we can't stop somebody. Like people are going to do what people are going to do. And what really is different now is it's so much more of the general public that's getting involved, as you guys are saying. We do advocate, or I advocate that people do work on everything so that they can get the most out of the least. But sometimes I think even that gets kind of lost. I've seen people on our podcast who've commented saying, they almost feel like that the educators are these gatekeepers. We're trying to not let them do things. And why do you have to be and I have to be pro in order to do these doses? And it's like, well, no, realistically, you don't have to be. You could do whatever you want.
have a crack.
Yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I think risk is so contextual. It's so contextual, because often when people are pursuing, that either entry into, or they're already in that PED world, they're not blank slates.
Yeah.
They've already lived a life. They've already come into that setting with certain types of health backgrounds, or mental health backgrounds, or epigenetics, genetics. There are so many different factors there that's going to make risk look different for each and every one of us. But there are some basic, I think, tenets that we can employ and gather and put into practice, such as if you're taking a pharmaceutical compound that doesn't really have great established research on, then we need to be able to take some steps that are proactive and even reactive to keep things at least less risky, right? Less riskier than they could be. Or if you are taking a black market compound that we have no idea where it came from, what's in it, so on and so forth, then are there some steps that can be taken to help reduce that risk a little bit? And so I do think that, if we just start to, I challenge people when they come to me, even for predominantly male coaches that come to me and want to learn about women's health, I go, why? Why are you here? Are you really wanting to see your female clients through? Or are you just not wanting to screw them up? Is it kind of more of this fear-based place that you're coming from? Either way, my role is to first explain to them that they're never going to know everything there is to know. None of us are. Number two, start with the foundations and the fundamentals. I think all too often people start down these paths, especially as coaches, that have no idea about some of the basic fundamental information that we can glean from biochemistry, about what these compounds are and what they do in general in the body, so that then they can actually apply it to people. I mean, like with my husband's work and podcast, like, even just talking about different compounds, and it seems like there's a lot of times that people don't even recognize all the compounds that exist, the synergies that can exist between them,
Sure.
because they just follow that same protocol time after time that one coach gave them 15 years ago, and they think that that's gospel because they don't know any better. So I do think there's a lack of knowledge is definitely a big contributor to the risk.
Yeah, I've seen that where people thought that's because they had worked with a coach, and then they come see me, and they were taking it's like this is an absurd cycle for a female, and but they never wanted to in the first place because it was just a lack of information. When I could explain to them when that's their only goal, it's like, well, there are many variables to make that goal,
Absolutely.
not just this. And then they're willing to, or they want to reduce that use, and still understand that it's still going to be better
Yeah.
for their performance. They're going to get more out of it.
Well, like something like trenbolone, had pre-contest male bodybuilders assuming that you have to take trenbolone in order to compete. And
Did you see Bumstead's recent video about it?
I heard about it.
I heard about it, yeah.
So he goes, and I don't know how much, sorry for interrupting Victoria, but I don't know how much truth or non-truth, you're not going to speculate on that, but he literally said, don't speak out about cycles, blah, blah, blah. In this video, he just goes, I don't reach for that because I don't have to.
But here's the thing is I work with some of the best athletes.
Yeah.
You talk to some of the best athletes. They don't.
Yeah.
They're there because they're not us. They have that it factor that makes them so uniquely tuned for the activity that they're asking their body to do.
Yeah, like we were saying before, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That thing.
Extra binding.
And it's usually it's usually multiple things. Yeah, whether it's receptor sites or affinity and ability for turnover rapidly, or be able to buffer against reactive oxidative stress, or to be able to even just have some sense of regular pituitary and hypothalamic function, despite all the things that are going on, let alone the drugs. There are people that are just superior beings, which is why they're in the top elite of sport. And when we talk about the strength sports in particular, was mentioned earlier, when we talk about this, you buy into them. If you have the economic capacity to do so, you buy into them. It's not like we're talking about certain Olympic ventures. There is an ability for somebody to buy the body that they want to compete in the organization that they want, and that doesn't involve having any real skill before that to do it. So it's a very different, I think, economic culture. That strength, iron sport culture is very different from other sports. And that's not saying that some recreational like footballer isn't going to go grab a bottle of this, that, and everything else. But it definitely is a lot more rampant when we're talking about body culture, because here is this thing that is apparently going to make this happen, and that it's often seen as the most direct way to do that.
Yeah, and people won't believe Bumstead. We get it. I hear it all the time, and I've seen it. And had I not seen it as a coach myself, seeing people that are like the Ferraris of bodybuilding, and it's amazing when you finally see somebody who it's like, wow, this guy literally turned pro using very little, very little. This guy's competing as a pro using very, very little. It until I actually saw it myself, I wouldn't have believed that. It's just and that's the thing I think people really struggle with, because I think that in our society we see the drug and trends, specifically trends like the thing. You hear about it in mainstream media now that people are talking about. I walked into the gas station and this 20-year-old kid was like, "Hey, you coming from the gym?" It's like, no. He's like, "You ever use steroids?" I was like, back in the day. He said, what about tren? It's like a 20-year-old kid. He's like, "Oh, I took it, man. I just started taking it. It was wild. Like everything they say is true." There's this lore about it, and they think that they will equal Bumstead, that this is the thing. Like you said, you can buy it. They think that they can buy this, and they think that that's the answer. And I get it, because if you If you go online and you start researching what steroids are and you look at the different profiles, it'll say that this steroid is going to do this. Well, I don't want that to happen, but I sure would like this. You can put a list together. Let's see, I would like to get bigger. Yeah, I'd like to get stronger. So I'm going to get this one, and this one.
20 times as fast.
Yeah,
do
yeah.
This one.
Exactly. It's like a video game almost. You, and then people truly believe it in their heart that that's the answer. And if you tell them anything otherwise, then you're a liar.
So I've put this argument forward in a paper recently about Trenbolone, because in the academic community, obviously, there was no separation. Steroids were steroids, right?
Yeah.
Until recently, it's, here's something that, it's more potent.
Yeah.
It'll do the job, but it also comes with all these psychosocial effects that you probably don't want, that might derail your training. I mean, if you're busy, punching holes in drywall, you're probably not lifting, right? If that's one of the effects that
You're sleeping on the couch, not your girlfriend.
If you're sweating, can't sleep. If there's other disadvantages, and there's just there's this myth and this law, like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
But there's not much discussion around this unless you take a deep dive in some forums. I've got an honest student doing this now, looking at what the discourse is. And, some of it's pretty intense, but we need that open discussion. Like if you're waking up and doing some wild sexual stuff, like other people want to know. They want to know if you're what's going on, like what's really going on. What is the price that you're paying?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I wish that more individuals knew that when you go to Google and or whatever search browser you're using, and you just type in, let's say, best cycle or a steroid cycle, that the information that's coming first are by steroid producers. They're using education as a tool for people to buy their products a lot of the time. And I see this a lot with the women's cycles, particularly because I've done a big deep into like, where is this information coming from? And it's manufacturers or distributors creating information for their users that is based off of nothing. Some of it's based off of some research that exists or some old biochem information, but it would be like, going to a brand's website, I don't know, Coca-Cola, and being like, okay, well, is Coke good or bad? Should I drink it? And how much should I drink? Well, of course they're going to give you the answer that you're looking for, which is like, great, excellent. There might be some risk, but don't worry about it. You're good. And like
4 weeks.
Yeah,
4 weeks on, 4 weeks off.
You're fine.
No worries.
And so like that like lack of information literacy, that lack of ability to critically think that we just haven't pop culture and subcultures overall, not just within bodybuilding, translate to this, because now people are trusting just this random person on their TikTok page that's being like, this is the answer to all your problems. And because people feel so awful about themselves because of social media and because of all these other social factors, they engage.
Well, it's easier. It's easier. It's not.
Well, it's coded as easier. Yes.
It's easier. Exactly. Yeah. It is. It's easier to think that like, hey, I can take this thing and I can get that, versus, oh, I have to do all this hard work and maybe I have to be, really genetically gifted on top of that to really get it. Like, and that's I think that the way social media works too, the way the podcast works, the way anything works nowadays is it has to be black and white.
Yep.
And if it's the truth doesn't, it's not as dramatic. It doesn't.
That's where I struggle so much with social media.
You need the word must.
Yeah.
Or optimal.
Yeah.
It's hard because everyone needs to once they find their place on social media, and the market only responds to black and white.
Yeah.
And then so I end up posting hardly anything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's so difficult.
Most people don't know I work with the people I do. And it's not that they're not vocal about it, it's that I'm not. Because social media is crippling for somebody that doesn't think in black and white.
But if I can interrupt, if you connect to the people you do
Yeah,
connect
the
with,
people you do too. Yeah,
those people you can help. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? There are going to be that smaller percentage,
absolutely.
and they're like, okay, yeah, they're thinkers.
hadn't,
You know?
hadn't got to that point
Oh,
yet. I was
sorry.
about to say that the following that I do have is the people that are are really invested in actually learning and learning for themselves. Because
Yeah.
none of us have the tools to make steroid use, quote, safe. We can do it safer, but there's never any guarantee, no matter what we employ, no matter what routes we go. There's so much unknown and so many variables involved that all we can do is try to help people have the tools to do it safer or without as much risk. But even if they employ those things, that doesn't guarantee, your get out of jail free card and that, oh, you're on to the next thing and all is good. That doesn't, because nothing does. You see people that use, clinically approved prescription drugs and they don't have that get out of jail free card at the end of use, that there are implications. It's just that within the world that we're in, the implications have been magnified as much as the positive outcomes have been. And so you get this really weird skewed relationship between risk and reward, where outside of our sport, risk is high and reward is often like belittled or berated, like, oh, you're just doing it for big muscles and that's it. And then within our subculture, it's the opposite, where reward gets amplified and risk gets more, I think, not necessarily suppressed, but neutralized.
Yeah.
People take the emotion out of it unless something bad happens. And then you see the people that are like doing the hell, I wish I would have, never taken this because look, I ended up in the hospital with like X, Y, and Z. And that's not always even related to their use.
Well, a great example is when I was first learning about PEDs, everybody would come off cycle between, they would recover, they would do PCT, and that they would maintain their natural production, they would maintain fertility. And now it's pretty much a given, 22-year-olds, they just say, hey, I'm going on, and, I'm just going to go to cruise or TRT between. And it's like nowadays, as far as like minimizing risk, we're looking at, guys that are quite young that are going to be testosterone dependent, for the rest of their lives. And that's completely acceptable, within the community.
Yeah.
It's been driven in the culture in other aspects as well, not just with, especially in America, like we were discussing before, where it's a lot more available now for the transition of people, which then it's been more just a given you're allowed to in medicine to be prescribed, these
Well, and
hormones.
I can't sit here and pretend that like there isn't potential long-term implications of pharmaceutical estrogens and progesterones for things like fertility or for certain metabolic parameters. But just like with androgens, it's not universal. There's no one size fits all. Should there be more harm prevention risk management strategies for those? Absolutely. Were they intended to be in place right from day one from the powers that be? Absolutely. Did they get lost to the wayside over time? Absolutely. And now you have individuals on a steroid because they're a steroid. When we talk about hormonal contraceptives or hormone replacement therapy in women, that they're steroids too. So you're getting women put on steroids from a young age and, discontinued without any support to do so within our kind of medical realm right now.
I see it's getting pushed at younger and younger ages as well. And then these same ideas of just long-term use, especially there's still a lot of these kids are in developmental stages and mentally in developmental stages, and then taking stronger, mind-altering levels of like tren and some of the stronger orals as well.
I think it's so interesting. I don't know if you've looked into the history of some of the ideas and practices around testosterone in particular. But like, if you look back when testosterone was first created and on the scene in the 1930s, the two kind of clinical groups that were excluded were children, and they had that 18 and under, and then women. But if you didn't fall into any of those two categories, you're okay to use. And this was more of the pharmaceutical guidelines. So there was always this narrative that children or people under the age of 18 should not use these compounds. But then you get clinical cases where like Turner syndrome or Fragile X, where they were being used in clinical medicine.
What
And
if I got acromegaly, like
Yeah.
VGH?
yeah, and I feel like then that kind of got misappropriated from the bodybuilding community, like, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And I do feel like with more interest from more people in the strength world at a younger age right now, we're seeing those younger ages as a result, the use starting at a younger age. And not just from androgens, but also other PEDs as well, that it could be potentially just as impactful for their long-term health.
Is do you think that culture move is allowing people to think that that's okay for?
Yeah, I think risk has been diluted within the bodybuilding strength power sport.
Accessibility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the more users, right? If more people have adopted this practice, the
Social
more
norms
that
take hold,
exactly
yeah.
the more that people think it's okay, because I know all of these people and they seem fine. So, and it's also this like kind of gambler's fallacy of like, it's not going to happen to me, because they don't actually understand what they're pursuing. I can remember when I was in high school, because I started training at 15, so I was fairly young as a young female back in the early 2000s, and anabolic steroids weren't okay for good guys in high school to take, but M1Ts were, and they are incredibly dangerous. Like incredibly, but they were being sold behind the counter at certain supplement stores, and you could get in and take them, and you would see guys just like whew, blowing up. But then you also saw what happened when they went off, that they just thought they were taking a supplement without having any clue what it was, and practitioners having no clue how to support these kids because they don't. That's not in their vernacular. A kid goes and like, yeah, I'm taking this supplement. And it's like, whoa, okay, that's not a supplement. But the practitioners don't know that. And so you then just breed more issues. And then now, you've got an individual that might have to be on testosterone replacement for the rest of their lives. But because of all of this, how we view testosterone in society is not okay, unhealthy, risky. It's inaccessible in many medical communities because of just the social, the political, the legal. Yeah, everything comes together to prevent that one individual from actually getting the support that they need. So it's just, we're in a really weird, strange time right now.
So there's a bit of research recently that I use this in a paper as well recently from Cohen, who looked at methamphetamine use in Thailand, which has been on the rise. Anyway, these structural factors, Latour's actin network, I think that's what underpinned the analysis.
I've read the paper.
Essentially, right, because of the demands of increasing work hours and increasing requirements, younger and younger children in Thailand were turning to methamphetamine for whatever reason.
No kidding.
Same thing. We look at, let's just take Australia as the example. Body image has become an issue. Perhaps social media plays a role in that, as well as group norms, social norms, all those things. We see this in other countries and nations as well, right? But is this not just a response to
Absolutely.
Like a very reasonable response as well, a rational consumer response? I've got increased requirements being placed on me.
Yeah.
I've got to meet these requirements because how else am I meant to, fit with the norm and compete against other men and women, both within a competition setting, but also just in life.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I'm going to turn to biotechnology, and it's available, and I see people with a lived experience. So what am I? I'm a rational consumer then, right? Like I'm just responding. I'm responding to what's going on.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound too crazy to me.
No.
No.
And I think you
Right?
see that with other forms, like we've been talking mostly about androgens, but like female body image linked to adipose levels and muscularity now, but traditionally it's always been adiposity. So you must maintain a lean physique, no body fat, low body fat, and then like the diet pill culture. People on certain things, and I mean, there was a couple of cases out of the UK that there were young girls, like we're not talking fitness industry people. One of them, she was like 17 years old and died on from DMP use.
Mm.
Like, how is that even, like, my brain, when I read that, I had a really hard time fathoming how somebody who is a young female not in bodybuilding could even come across DMP. But then you go, okay, but the internet, that exists. So looking up what's the most potent fat burner, and you're probably going to come across people talking about their fat being incinerated from DNP use. And that's not okay. But it's a consumer need that they've found the solution to the problem that they perceive that they have.
And I remember having this discussion with you. How do we implement change on a policy level to make structural changes in society? Because as a coach, there's not much I can do about that.
Yeah.
I can provide education, direction, and people come to me, and women, and it's been very recent in the last few years, women coming to me, it's like, I want to take tren. Man, how do I navigate this? Because I need them to tell me. I can't not also say just no.
Yeah.
Because they want to. I can educate them in the direction of them saying no. This is how I feel when I'm doing it. It's like it's a difficult thing to navigate. So I've always gone, in a situation like that, if I can't get them to say no, then it's how much can I reduce it by, and how much can I manage, because they're gonna take it anyway. So I mean that's one question. What do we do as a coach from a coaching perspective? But then what do we do to try and implement policy changes to change structure that's influencing individuals to do this?
I mean, UK, look at UK, we look at Canada, there's 2 places that are doing it right, that Class C framework, decriminalising possession, supply and trafficking, still supply and trafficking, but at least at the end user level, we're not fraught with all these other legal problems where, who do I tell, who do I talk to? Cops are watching me, or cops are watching this person, or like it's just an ethical minefield of other problems that influence the harms that aren't related to the drugs at all, the structural problems, right? That have nothing to do with, like there's the problems associated with I'm taking a gram of tren, and then there's the problems associated with what if the cops see me acquiring my, XYZ here in Australia, not necessarily in UK, Canada. And I think that's the other piece, the other important contextual piece to put into place here, that there's additional barriers for us here.
Absolutely.
And then
in the US.
Yeah.
And the US.
And then there's also like, how has the legal status influenced research and the ability to do research on these compounds? How has it influenced medical practitioners being able to just, under their medical ethics, do certain practices, or even talk about these drugs, or even show somebody how to do a safe IM injection, knowing that it's not with a prescribed drug, under their own ethics and medical ethics and our own social perceptions of these drugs. So I think it's such a big thing when we talk about, like, decriminalization is a great first step, but it's not the end. There's a lot of work that has to come, but that actually maybe could come once we do that. But right now we're in this weird kind of waiting space of hoping that things change, and they aren't, not fast enough with the increased use and accessibility.
But it just undermines everything, you know what I mean? Like if we've got a policy here, drugs are illegal, drugs are bad, we're ignoring the whole pleasure component that is like very real. People use drugs because they have a function or because it's fun. Like and that discourse, or holding back on that discourse, has been a huge problem. It's lack of transparency, lack of honesty, and therefore no trust. Can't trust someone, why would I listen to anything else that they have to say? But then on the other side of it, what's the next step? Well, how are we going to do anything from a public health angle if I'm the general practitioner and I'm in this ethical minefield, right? And it's, can I show them how to safely inject if they're using something that I haven't prescribed that I know they're requiring? No, the stance has got to be no.
Yeah.
So any other public health messaging, any education, any harm reduction advice we provide through coaches, through anything, it's literally just gatekeeping the next logical step, which is providing that top-down sort of approach that we spoke about, right? Like providing the information, getting the education out there, building literacy, substance literacy. It really is.
Yeah. And, what you said about, that discourse of bad, right? Then we, on the flip side, we're also not able to, like, by creating that dichotomy of these drugs are bad, and that because they're not these drugs which are good, we create this false labeling that exists. And with something like testosterone, it's like such a fascinating case study because it's like it is bad in some settings for some users for some reasons, but it's also used in clinical medicine. However, its use in clinical medicine has been so constrained because of how it's been labeled outside in the sporting world, that we automatically associate it as a PED and this important thing for vitality and prowess and everything else. And I'm not saying that it's not, but it's also not the only thing it does. And so there's definitely this weird kind of world of right, wrong, good, bad, prohibited, not, clean, drugged, whatever. There's so many different binaries that exist right now. And at least where I stand as a researcher is that we have to meet in the middle. Try to come at this as neutral as possible. To not always look at something as being the best performance drug or the most dangerous, to try to strip it down to what am I actually looking at here? And who's the individual user? And why are they wanting to use it? And what else is going on here? To really get messy in the information to actually provide the best possible way forward. But that's constrained. It's taken a long time to build the knowledge base I have. And I don't know that there's a lot of other people out there that can dive into the minutia that sometimes is needed. Not for everybody, but that's sometimes needed. I think us having more conversations like this is a positive step forward. I think that not to be all sweet, but I think that the work Scott's doing with his podcast is also phenomenal. Because they're having candid, conscious conversations. And that's the important thing. Like, I'm going to bring up an example and you can elaborate on this, but with recently he was trying to do some clickbaity titles and topics and was like, what's the most overrated and underrated steroid?
Yeah.
And it had pooled all the different personalities on the network. So asked a bunch of different IFBB pros and long-term bodybuilding coaches, like, what's the most overrated and what's the most underrated? And there wasn't a lot of agreement,
No.
but then there was.
Yeah.
Like, that's the wild thing, because they were like, well, it actually depends on who and for what reasons. Like, the reason why I think this is overrated, and they elaborated on it, but then the other person was like, well, that's why I think it's underrated. So I just think that because I actually listened to all of those episodes.
Oh, did
all
you?
of them saying I did. It's good data for me, but I think it was a really important thing for people to hear, that there's no one size fits all, that there's no agreement, even with these top level people, of
Yeah.
what's optimal or beneficial or not at all. It's going to come down to the individual. And that's why we have to build more knowledge about what are even the individual drugs that exist. Medical textbooks don't have them. Practitioners don't know. We don't have that list of all these different substances and what they all do.
I don't know if this is the right opinion or not, but there's a lot of things are overrated because a lot of the people who are coming to me don't look at the simple things that will help performance, like just taking testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've never, if it's an individual that has come to me who has never taken anything before, and they want to do test, tren, anadrol because
Of course, they had their list, right?
Yeah.
They know that this does this, that does that. They want those things.
Yeah, it's like try testosterone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, but it's not sexy.
Exactly.
It never is going to be.
Mm.
It's never going to be the sexy answer.
But you did mention when you asked the question here, you did say, one thing is education, and
Yeah.
and you're right. That's what all of us are saying here is just, and not everybody's going to listen. But the people who do. The people who do want it, they'll be there. And the reality is that there's always going to be people who want to take the shortest route, that try to cheat the system. It's always going to be
And they
there.
don't end up anywhere
No,
sometimes.
they don't.
But they have to. They're going to go through that whether we tell them or not.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. We can't stop them
Yeah.
from doing that ever.
I think it depends how the client came to me. Like a lot of the clients I've had, because I've worked with so many things in so many areas in their life, I've built a lot of trust in them. So by
Yeah.
the time it comes that they will take that, even though they've been heavily influenced in one direction, they will listen to my opinion,
Yeah.
in the direction to take. But that's taken also just a ton of trust building.
And if you can prove it to them, then you don't have to prove it to them long term, but short term, you can. They listen to what you say, and they follow it, and then they say, hey, Gus was right, and I'm making this progress, and then from there they've really bought in. You know what I mean? Then those people, they get it. And you know what, too? Hopefully those people will educate their friends, because before that, otherwise, it's just the guys talking in the locker room that my buddy did this, and
Well, there was this one guy that he came to me again because he just had no idea what to do. So he hadn't done anything for a long time, been out of training for like 3-4 years,
Yeah.
and come back and just straight back to what he was doing before. It was like a mixture of like 2-3 grams of a mixture of concoction of things, and his major concern when he came to me is like, I keep burning out. And so bit by bit, I was able to convince him to take his dose all the way down to 125 milligrams
Okay.
a week, and everything felt better.
Nice.
He felt so good. And the thing is, the progress, because I was already measuring his progress, but prior to doing that, the rate of progression and change was unchanged. It was no different.
I think that if we want to get really tangible, so at least my opinion, is that first starting off, if your bases are covered and you've got all of that is done, you're in a very healthy place, we're good. You want to always try to go minimum effective dose with the least amount of variables involved. So instead of taking 16 different compounds, 1.
And for the shortest duration.
Shortest duration of time. And also there are certain compounds in the PED androgen world that have a bit more residency within the steroid family. There are some that we just don't know. I mean, selective androgen receptor modulators, we just don't know. We don't know what they are. We don't know their long-term effects. We don't know how they work in the body. We don't know how they bind. We don't know if it's tissue selective of just androgen receptors, or are they interacting with others? We don't know. And so if we want to try to reduce risk, hey, let's go to the ones that have more residency towards them. Not saying take all of them all the time, but they're going to at least be a little bit less risky. Or in terms of peptides, same thing. There are certain ones that have a bit more data and substantive information behind them than others. There are certain practices we also know that can be really helpful if we're walking into this, potential risks, like monitoring for certain things like blood pressure. If we know that testosterone is going to have its potential outcomes for our just viscosity of blood and altering other types of biochemical experiences within the body, well, that's a really easy thing that we can do. And it's quite well we can really suss out that this is going to be something potentially useful for you to do. So I do feel that there's a way that we can take this, quote, risky thing and definitely make it a little bit less risky right away, right off the bat, without getting into too much nitty gritty individual factors.
Low cost too.
Yeah, absolutely. Low
We always
cost.
got to put that economic.
Yeah,
forward,
absolutely. Costs a lot less to do it this way, to do it certain other ways where you're going to implode your body as a result of what you've done. And the coming from me, my stance on this, it's taken me years to come to this place of okay, let's give the people what they want because they're going to do it anyways. But let's give it to them better. So with female users, get your menstrual cycle in a good place and really understand the intricacies of that before you explore this realm, and know that in some individuals, even the smallest input of an androgen is going to take that whole system and just like shake it like a snow globe and turn it on its back end. And there's what we don't know yet is when and why and who, what cases. I can tell you on an individual level, of course, if I get all that information down, but it's it definitely is quite a bit of a complex thing. So from a generalization, track your menstrual cycle, track for ovulation, make it be there before you start. And the minute it starts to go south, well, you're on, stop and ask some questions. Like that to me is a relatively micro step that a female user can take.
So if there was like 5 steps before a woman starts using, what's the 5 steps? Like
have it written down back at our Airbnb.
Amazing.
I have that because I have kind of
that's what we need for everyone, for the coaches, for the end users
I have
as
my
well, right?
my manifesto for female steroid use in the 21st century. I presented on this in the fall, and he was like, "Oh, manifesto it's an intense word." I'm like, "I feel intensely about this," so we're gonna go with that. But number one is get healthy and stay healthy, and healthy is not just the absence of disease. So it's not just being able to say like, "Hey, my thyroid's functioning well, I'm digesting my food well, I'm sleeping well, I'm engaging in positive social relationships, I've got a positive affect most of the time. Obviously life happens, but that I'm in this kind of healthy state more than I'm not in this healthy state." It's when things become habitual that we get into problems. One-offs, that night you didn't sleep, that's okay. But if you're not sleeping every single night, we've got a problem. And so laying that foundation and trying to keep it there for as long as possible before you engage in use. So what I mean by that is it's not that you're doing this, you finally get to this place and you're 1 month in. And you're like, okay, well, I'm healthy now. Victoria says to, go forward. No, you're needing to do that for more than just a month, particularly if you have been away from that place for a long period of time. You need to try to get to that point for a long period of time before you engage.
I think what I do with people when I try to take that approach, because these individuals want progress.
Yeah.
And so that's the only way they see things, take this to get there. So I always measure and show them the results. Absolutely. And remind them of their goals. So it's like, even though we're taking these small steps, let's look at the rate of progression you're making. It is significant. And then remind them that it's going to take quite a significant time to get back to where you were if you're out of the game for quite some time. So understand that you're just not going to get there then. And it doesn't matter if you take anything. Yeah. Right. It's like, it's almost like fake. You can enhance your performance in a fake way. But it's unsustainable because it's not built on solid foundations.
Yeah. The next thing then is like ovulatory menstrual cycle. That's a big piece of it too. So having a bleed is not the sign of a healthy menstrual cycle. You have to ovulate. The bleed is merely the social signifier because you see it. You see literal change. You see it's the difference from me, my body, than your bodies because women socially have it, men do not. But it's also the change in my body. I don't have it, and then I have it, so something's different. So because it's this visual cue, it's gotten way more attention than it should, because it's ovulation. That's how we make progesterone. And if we don't make progesterone, we don't have a harmonious menstrual cycle or steroid balance in our bodies. And as a result, we're not going to be in the healthiest state. Again, one-offs, they're going to happen. We know that. The research is showing that. Like really good big data studies have shown that. But it's when this is your norm, if you're anovulatory. If you're anovulatory, not ovulating, and this is your norm, you need to investigate why. Number one is this is really important for long-term and short-term health. Number two is if you're going to go down that route of PEDs, it's going to make it safer. It's going to have potential implications to actually make that whole process a lot better and easier for you. So that's my number two. My number three is, and this, again, I don't know if this is going to be controversial for you, but I'm just going to put that out there, is write down before you even start on drugs, what's your line in the science? If you know that you can potentially get virilization, if your voice might change, if that's your line in the sand, write it down and keep it and reflect back on it regularly, because I see it all the time in women users that their line in the sand was drawn and they crossed it, but they never actually consciously did that. I hear it retrospectively going like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I took these drugs that did this X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, wait a second, but you knew that these drugs were going to do that. Well, yeah, I didn't think it would happen to me. I'm like, right? You've heard me talk before. I don't call them side effects. I call them unintended effects. They're just not the ones you wanted. And so I think if we can be very realistic with ourselves up front and go, okay, I'm going down this route. There's not tissue selectivity. It's not like I'm just going to be able to grow my glutes and hamstrings by inflating my androgen levels in the body and have nothing else happen. Where is my line in the sand? And then regularly monitoring for that. So for women, I
You
recommend.
can measure it though, like timbre of voice.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
and
yeah.
that's I've promoted that since 2016. So measuring your voice, taking pictures of uh, using the Fairway Galloway scale for androgenicity, and so that's used in individuals with hyperandrogenous endogenous. But we can apply that scale and have people taking photos all along. We can also begin to employ other types of synergies that we know make androgen amplification a lot worse in women, such as working on insulin response and keeping that in a healthy place, and blood glucose response and inflammation, because we know in a lot of women there's a triangle that exists because of the hyperandrogenism endogenous literature, that there's a triangle that exists between insulin resistance, high androgens, and high inflammation. And as an athlete, we know we're kind of working on all of those. So can we take other steps? So at least this one variable can be done in a safer, more manageable way. Fourth thing would be regular monitoring, not only of like the variables we just talked about, but your actual health monitors. Female users seem to be more ignorant around things like blood pressure than male users, about phlebotomy than male users. Like it's not even on their radar. And then when we come to things like visual changes, well, that's what fillers and Botox and hair removal's for. That they just override that. Instead of that used to be a barrier to use, and that would stop use. And now women are just like, whoop, I can go over it.
Oh, the silver bullet. Yeah.
Yeah. But then it's like, but that is the end point of a ton of different physiological reactions that have occurred.
And then now it's just open now.
Exactly, because I've got a tool, a pill to make you tall, a pill to make you small. So that's one for me that's like continually monitoring for these things. And I do recommend that people don't necessarily do this route alone. Because when you're in it, it's very hard to see anything else than your goal being reached. It's very hard to see the viralization of voice changes. I mean, I've worked with individuals who've done certain things that I've recommended over the years, and they still come back and go like, I messed up. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, I didn't stop when I should have. Well, why? Well, I was so close to that pro card. And it was just one show more, and then just one show more, and all of a sudden they've done. Exactly, it's always one show more. But if you're driving it forward, it's hard to have those critical conversations by yourself. And so that's where I do recommend to have a trusted advisor that you can talk to. Take out that list, go over your line in the sand, review some of this information with, so that at least your use can be done safer. I can't guarantee you're going to come out with your fertility being intact still. I can't guarantee that you're going to come out without any, Scotch-free. I can't. None of us can. But can we do it just better? And I think we can. I think that long-term use is never the answer for most individuals, unless under certain circumstances. With women, we know we have to balance androgens, estrogens, and progesterone. And if we don't, we are going to run into problems. And so if you're always inflating one in the female body, we're going to have implications, short and long term. And so whether that means that we're introducing some type of adjacent hormone therapy in a very controlled way for estrogens and progesterone, not progesterones, but progesterone, or does that mean that we're coming off, we're staying off and doing it in a safe way, regaining our ovulatory cycle when possible, or augmenting if not, and then riding out that way for a while before we re-engage. It looks different for everybody, but long-term
Those are great steps.
Yeah.
They're really cool steps. Do you think?
We don't have like a women's PCT, right? I mean, we know what a guy's PCT looks like.
Yeah, and it's different for women because the use of HCG, HMG in women when in a hyperandrogenic state can lead to ovarian, just ovarian hyperstimulation, which it happens in IVF clinics. So there is research on this, but it can be very dangerous. The use of Clomid in certain individuals can be very the opposite to what we need. So there are steps that we can take. Most of them aren't sexy, so people don't like them when I'm like, actually you need to like slowly titrate. And it's not because of anything other than we just need to give your body like a landing pad and we need to introduce certain ancillaries. So for example, something like a berberine or a metformin in a post-contest female bodybuilder who's also coming down off being on high androgens and is also going to be re-engaging with like food can be a super useful tool to help take that triangle and just reduce that one synergy point to it. But that's not what we would traditionally think of as being HRT. Just like certain agents to help with rekindling the follicle's ability to make hormones again. And that's non-hormonally mediated. The way that my brain works is there's enough hormonal chaos going on in your body right now. The last thing I need to do is put something else in the mix. I need to give your body the tools to do this itself and to start to remake hormones again safely within your own limit, because it's your own limit that you pushed that got you into this problem in the first place. And so certain types of mitochondrial agents can be really helpful. They're used again in very successfully in amenorrhea and anovulatory cases in different countries around the world as non-hormonal options to help support regaining fertility. So there are options out there. They're just not what we perceive as being the path that needs to be taken.
Because it's quite simple with men. You just take Clomid and it's ready to go. But then for women,
Well, for women, we have multiple follicles in our ovaries, and those follicles are at different stages of growth and development at any given point in time. And even if you're on, it doesn't mean that that's been completely arrested, because we often don't do things like ultrasounds to be able to get that inside look. And if you have multiple eggs at different points in development, that means that they're making hormones at different points in their development. Even if you're on, it doesn't mean that that goes away. And once you come off, certain drugs may amplify making those hormones and actually cause more of a dysfunction to occur. And so it is a lot trickier. It is a lot more uncertain, because I can't tell you, if you're still making and if your follicles are even healthy enough to make adequate amounts of hormones. I can't. So all I can do is to try to safeguard where I can, buffer where I can, and take what is, in my opinion and through practice, the most controlled, conservative approach possible. Land the plane before you crash it, get it to the ground, take a step back. We know that ovarian development, the last stage is about 3 months. Let's get us to the ground for 3 months and then pursue testing options. Because if I test right when you come off, it's not going to tell me anything. It's like testing an on-cycle bodybuilder. Like, what am I gaining from this? Yes, I'm gaining some health markers, but if we're talking specifically about steroid hormone production, that's not going to tell me anything. I can run other things, but the steroid hormone production, we've got to wait that 3 months at least to get a baseline. Then from there, kind of branching out into different worlds. But it doesn't make any sense to run that after use, discontinued use right away.
this knowledge is not, I guess, easy or common, because we've got so many coaches.
You don't know. No.
So, I mean, how do we make a more systematic change?
Yeah.
To
Change is
bring
hard.
this.
Yeah, because let's highlight, like, not everybody's like Gus.
No.
Not everybody's like Scott.
No.
So let's,
Yeah.
And
the more of us that come out, it doesn't, I would say we have more steroid education, good steroid education now than ever before. We're still here, aren't we? Change is hard. And I think that we can take a look at other drugs, whether it be the decriminalization of marijuana, and now seeing what that's done in certain countries and how that slowly started to create change. But there's still so much left to be known. There's still people that, regardless of what their law says, still see it as being bad and immoral and all these other things. And so change takes a hell of a long time to occur. And there are some social philosophers that think that change never can truly occur. that you're just going to always be building on the pieces from the past. And so I think what we can do is create education. What we can do is have these types of conversations. And what we can do is just, I mean, it sounds terrible, but we can just do what we can in our capacity with the aim that it's going to hopefully at least help one person, maybe more. And if it's more, great. But I know for myself, I've had to nest and like kind of rest in that fact of if I help one person, I'm good. Because that's one person that's in a better place now because of my message. I don't aim high like I used to.
Yeah, I've come to some of those similar realizations as well. What do we do from a, I just had it on my mind, from an ethical perspective when we have two, like you have all the performance kind of culture and your athletes get stuck in that mindset. Also listening to me, but how, I guess the question is like, how can we navigate as coaches when we're battling against other external influences from other competitors or from the growth of the sport, where it's like driven to be pro and it's driven by market as well, because recently in powerlifting there's more pro. Now they're trying to create pro leagues in powerlifting. There has been one, and now there's more that's growing, and there's more money involved, and I'm finding it difficult to navigate and find an ethical boundary, but also look after the client and provide performance. It's
You might be able to speak to this because you're also on the front lines of coaching.
I don't have anything to say at the moment.
Yeah, I guess it's tough.
It's tough, yeah.
I'm
still navigating.
But I don't think we have necessarily just one answer. Like, I don't think we have a right answer or a wrong answer or anything like that. I think we just have to understand like the grayness of all of this. That there's going to always be the people that are not going to listen. You can put the answer right in front of their face, and they're still going to choose to turn the blind eye to it. And then you have the people that are going to be able to be more receptive and responsive to it. I focus on those people. I try to create as much for accessibility, but I know that I still, no matter what I do, I can't change that individual's mind. So instead of me laboring over it, I've now just kind of said, okay, you're gonna do what you're gonna do. Let me at least provide some tools and some resources to maybe help you do that better. But instead of me spending all this time and energy just like hitting my head against the table, I'm now going to focus on the people that are coming to me for help. Because in the hope that they're going to also help me take my message and pass it along and create that change.
And just keep having that conversation.
And you will. You will.
All right. Any last? Yeah, cool. Well, thank you guys for coming on. I think hopefully we make some influence a few people in a positive direction. So
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.